today, I normally would have for you guys a bit of prose from a well-known novel, but I recently found something that I myself had written, and since I've shared with you guys so much of my poetry and you guys have been pretty receptive to that, I wanted to see if you guys would have any interest in listening to me read off some of my own prose. So this is a short story that I wrote from the perspective of water. And it's sort of, I had read a short story that a friend had written from the perspective of a dog, and I was thinking, okay, I've read short stories from non-human perspectives on animals, on objects, but how would one write a short story from the perspective of a liquid? And so I came up with this little story about water. And it sounds strange saying a water, but that's kind of how I have to explain it, where the water, this water I guess consists of a few tablespoons that sort of moves on its own as if it's its own being, but it's still water, it's still liquid. Anyway, this was written, I want to say 3-4 years ago, so it's old, it's unedited, it's not particularly good, but I think it's interesting, and I called it Aquarius because I don't know, I liked that sort of name at the time. It really doesn't have anything to do with the piece itself, but anyway. I'm just going to read the first half of it or so. 1. My life is not a very eventful one. I've remained in the same lake, not flowing down the river out to sea like my relatives do when they grow older. Sometimes I let myself sink to the bottom of the lake, maybe kick up some dirt or wash over a bottom-feeding fish. I may form a small wave and carry a child's remote-controlled boat for laps around and around until he has to go home for lunch. Usually, though, I swirl around in the shade near my favorite willow tree. Few people ever disturb me there, as most prefer to be on the other side of the lake, out in the sun. People are interesting beings. Much more interesting to me, anyway. I am merely water. Granted, it's nice knowing my purpose is to help life flourish, but until I end up in a water bottle or in the soil of a plant, my existence has very little meaning. The sad part is, once I have fulfilled my duty in quenching the thirst of some person, a creature, or a plant, I will cease to exist. People have a word for this fading of existence. The word is death. Technically, I am not really alive, which is rather sad. However, the way I've heard it described, no longer existing on this planet Earth, it makes me want to do more than just become another beverage. I've had dreams of what I could do someday. Maybe I'll wash the shampoo out of someone's eyes, or pass through the gills of a desperate salmon as she rushes upstream. If I'm lucky, I'll meet someone, maybe a foreigner, when we're out at sea. Together we could carry boats of fishermen back home to their wives and children. Alright, maybe I'm a dreamer, but I've heard many stories about perfectly good water poured out into a glass and then tossed down the drain without a second thought. Life in pipes is one that is only worth it if it's for a reason. 2. Today started out as just another day. I was swirling in a figure eight in the shade of a willow tree when I heard a rustle in the bushes. I paid no attention, thinking it was a curious dog or a pesky squirrel. To my surprise, out stepped a boy. He was rather young, but just old enough to be in school. Close behind, his parents followed. "This spot is perfect," he exclaimed, pointing to a patch of grass under the willow tree. It was obvious that few people had been there in a long time, probably because of the trek through the bushes that was required to reach it. I didn't pay much attention to what happened next. The parents laid out a large checkered blanket and a picnic basket. The boy made an attempt to climb the willow tree. When he couldn't, his father ruffled his sandy brown hair. "Maybe when you're older, kiddo," he said, his Irish accent just thick enough to be noticeable. Minutes later, his mother finished making the sandwiches. After grabbing his, he sat by the edge of the lake, dipping his toes in the water. It was in this moment that I realized I had never been so close to a person. Sure, I had observed them and brushed along many things made by them, but I had never been able to touch one. Slowly but surely, I made my way towards his feet. Once I was close enough, I passed by quickly, weaving through his toes and out again. The boy giggled and lifted his toes out of the water. "Hey, that tickled," he said, as if he was speaking to someone. Which he kind of was. If I had a mouth, I would have smiled, and if I had smiled, I'm sure he would have smiled back. My first human contact. To water, this was as significant as a baby's first step, or losing a virginity. The boy didn't stay for long. In fact, he ran back over to his parents after finishing a sandwich. After more eating and conversation, he disappeared into the bushes. His parents packed up, and then they too disappeared. I wondered if I'd ever see any of them, especially that boy, ever again. I know one thing's for sure, even if I don't. I will always remember his sandy brown hair, his innocent giggle, and the way his toes felt. More than ever, though, I think I will remember his eyes. His eyes sparkled and were bluer than I could ever be. It's been years since I first saw him, and months since I last saw him. At first, he passed by the lake at least once a week, and had a picnic once every 4 or 5 weeks. His weekly visits have since become more and more spread out, and similarly, his family picnics have been too. I know humans grow up sometimes, but I didn't expect this to change his mannerisms so much. I find myself thinking about him quite a lot. I figure he's about 10 years old by now. Maybe he no longer enjoys the lake? No, that doesn't make sense. Maybe he's on vacation? Yes, that must be it. The last time I saw him, he wasn't picnicking with his family. In fact, he was at the lake by himself. He had attempted to climb the willow tree, only to realize there was already a girl in the tree. As soon as he identified her as female, he skittered down the tree and stepped back. She jumped down from the tree, and they sat down to talk. I had never seen her before, but she seemed like a very nice girl. She had long brown hair and waves down her back, freckles on her cheeks, and honey-colored eyes. She was very pretty, but what I envied most was her hair. If I was a human, I would want to have hair just like hers. The boy must have liked her hair too, because he tugged on it a couple of times. She didn't seem to like that. Actually, she screamed the first time. The second time, she just stood up and left. He ran after her. I sunk to the bottom of the lake. 4. It was a Thursday in the middle of the fall, and most kids were in school when I caught a glimpse of him. He was with his friends, and they were the only ones around. Since they were on the other side of the lake, I made my way over there to get a better look. The boy and his friends had tied a tire swing to one of the trees and were taking turns jumping off of it into the water. One by one, they jumped in. Then it was the boy's turn to jump. He landed in a cannonball, making a large splash. As he treaded water and I flowed around his shoulders, I realized that he'd grown a lot since I had last seen him. He'd hit puberty, and his baby fat was replaced with muscle. He was slightly tanned from spending time outside, and I guessed that he was an athlete, perhaps a swimmer. My theory was proven correct when he won a hold-your-breath contest and was the only one able to swim to the other side of the lake and back non-stop. And I carried him every stroke of the way. Becoming less of a boy and more of a man every time I see him, and yet his eyes still sparkle and his hair is still ruffled, just like the first day I saw him. They didn't spend the whole day by the lake, but they did spend a good deal of it there. After swimming, they sat in the grass and talked as they ate their lunches. The backpacks were all lined up by the trees, so I knew their parents thought they were in school. Sometime after lunch, they left together with plans to hang out in the park and play soccer. I didn't want him to leave, but at the same time, it certainly was nice to see him again. 5. It's official. The boy is no longer a boy. He is now a man. Not only has he not been to the lake in ages, but the last time I saw him was at night. And he brought a girl with him. It was the same girl with the same long brown hair, but she had grown tall and slim. Her freckles had long faded, and she had curves where she didn't before. And the boy who will forever be a boy, even when he is a man. He was taller and more muscular. His features were no longer soft and childlike, and he now had stubble brushed across his face. When I first saw the boy and the girl in the grassy spot by the willow tree, they sat and spoke for a while. Then they stood and began removing their clothing, preparing for a swim. I expected them to have their swimsuits underneath their clothes, but boy, was I wrong. Now, it was weird enough to feel human skin, but even weirder was to feel only human skin, without anything protecting their normally covered bits. The boy and girl swam around for a while. Being a swimmer, he was much better than she, but after a while they just started playing around. They splashed each other, hugged each other in this tangle of human water. I'm pretty sure I brushed every inch of his skin, intentionally or not. His shoulders have become wider, his chest and stomach muscles are more defined, and there were moments when I felt like I should have just left and stayed at the other end of the lake until they left. They crawled out of the water and onto the grass by the willow tree once more, slightly tired. The girl lay down on her back, and the boy sat sideways beside her before leaning downwards for a slow but passionate kiss. I sunk to the bottom of the lake. Watching any longer would feel so wrong, and besides, it would kill me much more than it was already killing me to hear every noise that escaped their desperate lips. By the time I returned to the surface hours later, they were gone. Okay. I think that's where I'm going to stop. But basically, I can sort of summarize what happens later on. But, let's see. Chapter 6 sort of talks through, a whole bunch of different events in the life of the boy and the girl. Dates and stuff, and he proposes to her, they get married, you have the wedding. I think chapter 7, they actually have the wedding, and talk about having the wedding by the lake, because that's, where they met. And the main character, the water, is so depressed and upset that she decides to go down the river. And she decides that, she wanted more than just to hope longingly for this boy who she would never be able to have. So yeah, she goes down the river, doesn't expect to ever see him again, but one day she sees him with his wife and his 2 kids, and they're dropping sticks into the water, to the river, at this little bridge, which is sort of a game I used to play when I was a kid, where you go to one side of the bridge, you each drop a stick, and then go to the other side of the bridge to see which stick comes out first. So they're playing that game, and of course then the water decides to carry the boy's daughter's stick across. And then chapter 9, she finally makes it to the ocean and sort of talks about what she's trying to figure out, what she's trying to do. Chapter 10 is many, many years later, and she sees the family, but the boy isn't there. And the wife is sitting out on a rock and crying, and she sort of sneaks a little bit closer and finds out that the boy has died. And it makes her so sad that she actually begins to evaporate and become water vapor. And slowly she evaporates, and then as, you know, the water vapor rises, it becomes a cloud. And chapter 11, she's bored with becoming a cloud. It's basically just talking about her being a cloud and trying to figure out, you know, what happens now. She's a cloud, she's floating around over land. At some point she's going to gather enough water vapor to rain, and once she rains, that's, you know, she's nearing the end of her life. And chapter 12, she comes across the boy's funeral, and they're there burying him, and she reigns. And that's it. It's a really depressing story, but when I sat down to write a story of water falling in love with a person, you know it's not going to end well. You know that the water and the person, the boy, can never really be together. It's, you know, obvious. So, there you go. Hope that didn't depress you guys too much, I guess. Hope you liked it. And yeah, I'm starting to go back and find a lot of my old writings, which is how I found this. It was a copy I had typed up, and a friend had written corrections and stuff like that, and I realized I wrote this with the intention of submitting it somewhere, and I never ended up doing that, so maybe I can finally go through it and edit it again and do something with it. But yeah, anyway, that's it for today, and I'll see you guys next time.